Good morning. It is Sunday, May 4th, 2025. And while I wanted to take this day off, there are a lot of things that I really have to sort of get across because I see that many people are just not absorbing the landscape. And I am going to have to use some other words in order for this to be able to stay on this channel. That said, I want you to know that what's been happening on Sean Atwood's show, meaning that his streams are being kicked off and sent to another podcast, that has been happening on my channel as well. Therefore, if for some reason you find yourself listening to one of my podcasts and you are suddenly on another podcast, just take down the URL for each of the podcasts that you're listening to so that in the event you are bumped off by this platform, you can just get back to it, okay? So the first photograph we're going to begin with is a photo of the non-lady, Victoria Hervey, with the current FBI Director, Kash Patel. And I don't know if people knew that she was very friendly with Kash Patel, who Donald Trump appointed as the new director of the FBI. Now, I'm not going to go very deep into Kash Patel, but if you look at information regarding Patel, you will see some commentary about the likelihood that he may be spending more time in nightclubs than he is at the three-letter agency. And as you know, Virginia Giuffre, God bless her soul, lost her life. In what manner, we still don't really know. I did reach out to her family 2 days ago. And it is Sunday, May 4th, and I haven't heard back from them. So I don't know what's going on, but I certainly will keep you updated. We know that Victoria, the evil, evil Victoria, has been very vocal about this photo of Prince Andrew with a 17-year-old Virginia and Ghislaine Maxwell. What I can tell you is that Sean also recently interviewed a JE survivor, Lisa Phillips, and she confirmed that she too met Andrew, and she added that her friend, a blonde that looked like Virginia, was also passed on to, let's say, Randy A. Okay? All right. I want to bring your attention back to the fact that your president, Donald Trump, and by the way, I am non-political. I have shared information about both political parties. And I'm also, I've also been very vocal about the fact that I believe what's been going on not only crosses political parties, but it does cross international borders. So, for example, just so that you know that it crosses international borders, there is a photograph here of the current king and his longtime friend, whose name I'm not going to mention. However, I think it's very clear who that man is. All right. I also want to add there's an old photograph of Randy A. with Nicole Kidman. Those of you who are following the types of cases that we are sort of shedding light on will understand that Nicole Kidman has a very unusual lineage, I'm going to call it. And it begins in Australia. Oh, interesting, because that's where Virginia was living. And it includes someone from whom she was born. I'm speaking in code, people. This is what it's come down to. From whom she was born. And I'm going to leave it there. But we see Andrew with Nicole Kidman. And then we see this photograph of Charles with, let's just call him our good friend Jimmy. Now, I have said that this crosses party lines. And so, therefore, I am going to read to you a certain article. Now, I'm going to go back and read. And by the way, I made a podcast about this about 2.5 years ago. So, one of the 4 victims who testified at Gillen's trial, which was, I believe, in November, December of 2022, was a woman who did not identify herself, but I've identified her, and the media has identified her, and I'm going to talk about her because it's very important to understand what's going on and what you are not seeing, okay? So I'm going to go start with the article, How Sweet, Trump's Brit of All Right. And then I'm going to read this article to you. Okay, I'm going to begin now. Just weeks after ditching his second wife, America's best-known billionaire Donald Trump has fallen under the spell of a 20-year-old English girl. Trump, 50, who has failed in his bid to secure the services of Princess Diana's butler, Paul Burrell, was in search of another British trophy when he met London model Anushka de Giorgio at a party in Manhattan. Several American millionaires already had their eyes on Anushka, but she was there with Robert Maxwell's daughter, Ghislaine, who has introduced several of her attractive friends to the property developer. And none of his would-be rivals owned a vast mansion in Florida like Donald does, Mar-a-Lago, where I have dined with him and his outgoing wife, Marla. Now, that is the person who wrote the article. And by the way, at Mar-a-Lago, when he was at his wedding to Marla Maples, it was attended by Leslie Wexner, J.E., and Wexner's very mysterious wife, who I write a lot about, again, on my Substack. There's just only stuff I'm comfortable with on my Substack. Okay, I'm going to continue with the article. After their meeting, Trump flew Madame Maxwell and the model south to the Sunshine State, where all three enjoyed a happy weekend together. When they returned to New York, Anushka was installed in one of Donald's many apartments there. Mr. Georgiou likes older men. She went out once or twice with Joanna Lumley's ex-husband, Jeremy Lloyd, who was 45 years her senior. Now, on my Substack, again, I have written about Jeremy Lloyd, who was sort of known in the 1960s and who was tangentially involved with the Manson unalivement of Sharon Tate, who was the wife of Roman Polanski, who was best friends with Playboy founder, I'm going to leave it blank. All of these worlds interconnect. It means that we have a marriage of not just Hollywood, not just of the royal family, not just the two sides of the political spectrum in the country where I live, but we have a marriage of many different things, okay? I am going to perhaps, so this is Anushka with her friend J.E. She was one of the 4 women who testified at Ghislaine's trial, as I said earlier. Now, we know that Carolyn Adriano was found not to be breathing in a hotel room. about a year and a half ago. Now, Sean started to talk about the people who suddenly cannot breathe, if you know what I'm saying, and he started to name some. Well, there are many more names. And I remember tweeting on my now gone account because, of course, the person whose name begins with E and whose last name begins with M decided that I perhaps was too controversial. Perhaps I was somebody who spoke the truth a little bit too often, that he made my entire account disappear. However, I had a running list of the unalive situations, and it includes many more names that have been shared to date. All right. Um, I'm going to leave it there. She went on to star, well, not star, but have a role in a movie by another, let's say, actor, with another actor. I shouldn't say by, but with another actor about whom I uploaded a podcast on this channel, um, who's very famous. Was very famous. Now, we all know that he was friends with Harvey Weinstein, that he is friends with Woody Allen, that he was friends with Tommy Mottola, that he was friends with people both in the music industry, in Hollywood, with, let's say, the party for whom Kash Patel currently serves, and with the Clinton administration, and many other people. And again, I want to go back to this. I'm going to leave it there for a little bit because I think many of you are not understanding what is going on. I want to remind you that Alexander Acosta, who was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, became involved with the JE situation back in 2005. He went ahead to sanction a federal non-prosecution agreement, and the deal granted certain co-conspirators and other unnamed co-conspirators immunity from facing criminal charges. It required JE to plead guilty to very small charges, like there were like at that moment in time at least 30, uh, let's call them not of age females who had stepped forward, 30. Only one was allowed to testify before a grand jury, and he was given a very lenient sentence, 13 months, but not even in jail. I mean, he was allowed to leave. He set up an office. He had his chauffeur pick him up every day. He only had to sleep in this stockade where there was like literally he was the only, let's call it, prisoner. He had a television. He had people, the guards were working for him. It was just an insane situation. Now, Alexander Acosta was indeed tapped by Donald Trump to become the 27th United States Secretary of Labor, which he did, commencing in 2017. Now, in 2019, after the arrest of J.E., he stepped down. He stepped down so that it would not attract attention to Trump's first administration. That is why he stepped down. He wasn't, let's call it, admonished, or he was given a promotion. I want you to remember that during the Franklin situation, all of those people that were involved got promotions. That is how the system works. If you have not read my book, Jeffrey Epstein, Predator Spy, I encourage you to pick it up. I just encourage you to pick it up. It's easier for me if you pick it up on my website. However, and I'm not going to read from it, I'm just going to tell you that J. Edgar Hoover, who was a friend of my abuser's father, and it was my abuser's father, Louis Rosenstiel, who, along with my abuser's father, his friend, and Donald Trump's best friend and attorney, Roy Cohn, who filmed at the Plaza Hotel in New York City, which later Donald Trump would own. In fact, I know when he bought it because my abuser, and I was still under that let's call it situation, and my abuser told me that he overpaid for it. However, there's a reason for that that nobody has even bothered to look into. That said, I'm not going to go into it right now. However, this group of people, and right now I'm only speaking about Trump, but it applies to like almost everyone. The director of the FBI at the time was Hoover. Hoover had been compromised for the duration of the time that he spent at this three-letter agency. He was found to be not breathing of a sudden heart attack just before some inquiries were being made. However, he spent the majority of his adult life heading this agency. We have heard from Maria Farmer, who said that she contacted this three-letter agency and that nothing happened. Now, something that I'm going to share with you is I too took myself to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I went to their offices in Manhattan. I had a very big envelope with me filled with information. I was deathly afraid for my life on that day. I'm trying to remember when it was. It could have been 5 years ago. It could have been longer. It was perhaps, I don't know, maybe 6 years ago. I don't remember. It was 5 or 6 years ago that I took myself to the headquarters here in Manhattan with a stack full of documents. And I got the runaround when I was in the building. I never received a call back from the three-letter agency, the FBI. One day, when I was tending to, let's call it a disabled relative in my apartment, I got a knock on my door. Now, I do not usually get anyone to knock on my door. My building is pretty secure. We have many cameras in front of our building. But someone knocked on the door, and I probably would have never said anything, but my relative, who was in a wheelchair, he is now deceased. My relative just automatically said, well, who's there? Because my relative suffered some brain damage after having a stroke, which left him paralyzed, and I was taking care of him. Otherwise, he too would have known not to say anything, because it is a custom of our family, based on what's happened to me, not to even let people know where we are. So therefore, when he said, who is it? The person on the other side said, FBI. Okay, well, since I did not anticipate a visit by anyone from the FBI, I wasn't going to open the door because I was terrified that something of big harm was going to happen to me. So what I did was I picked up my phone, I called the headquarters of the FBI, and I said, hey, this is my name. I want to know if you have sent someone to talk to me. And I'm going to stay on the phone for as long as it takes until you tell me that you have either sent someone, because typically the way it works is if they want to speak with you, they will alert you and set up an appointment. In any event, it was a woman who answered, and then she said to me, well, I don't see here that you are on our records as somebody from our office is being sent to talk to you. And so I said to her, therefore, I'm not going to answer the door. Okay, so I did that. Now, he would not go away. I told him to go away, that I had just contacted the office, and he was showing me his badge through the peephole of the door. He was showing me his badge. Okay, So then what I did was I called the police. Now, the police have never responded in the past whenever I have needed them. I've said that on this platform. Well, two tiny little police officers, tiny, tiny, tiny. Whenever the police have come to my home, where I've called them, they send tiny, tiny, tiny little people. I don't understand it. I'm small. They send people who are smaller than me. Okay, so I open the door when the police arrive, and the man is still standing there smirking. And the police tell me, "We're sorry, we can't intrude. We've checked his credentials. He is definitely from the FBI." And so I said, "Okay, well, if he wants to talk to me, then he can talk to me while you're here." To which they responded, "No, we have to leave. That is a matter between him and you." At which point I shut the door. I saw them get into the elevator, and I have so many locks on my door. I've lost count of how many locks I have on my door. And so, therefore, I did not allow this person, and eventually he disappeared. However, I want to remind you that Alexander Acosta, one more time, was tapped on the shoulder by Donald Trump to be named his labor secretary, which commenced in February 16 of 2017. He was confirmed by the U.S. Senate on April 27, 2017. Now, he had been appointed by President George W. Bush. On my Substack, I have all kinds of information on the Bush family. I want you to know that Jeb Bush was the governor of Florida during the time of the non-prosecution agreement. Okay? Now, I want to just go on and say that Howard Lutnick, who has been tapped by Donald Trump and is currently serving as the 41st United States Secretary of Commerce, and that began on February 2025. So just 3 months ago, Howard Lutnick was J.E.'s neighbor, is his J.E.'s neighbor. The house that Howard Lutnick lives in came through Les Wexner. Wexner purchased 9 East 71 and also purchased the house next door. He purchased another property where we know that the prime minister of another country would stay, in addition to where the so-called models were staying. Now, Howard Lutnick was the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, and he was one of the people who did not were miraculously saved on that horrible day of September, when there were this catastrophe that happened in downtown Manhattan. The horrible day of September on the 9th day, and the Donald Trump appointed Howard Lutnick is currently serving. Now, if you look at all of the people who are appointed by both parties people, look at the people who are appointed. Now, just an FYI, during Ghislaine Maxwell's trial, the judge, Allison Nathan, I remember, if I'm remembering her name right, I don't have it in front of me, I'm just going off memory because I've been studying this case so carefully that I'm kind of thinking I can at least off the cuff answer some of these things that are popping up. During the trial, she was given by then President, okay, so it's the other party, Biden. She was promoted into the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. So she was given a promotion. What did she do? She stopped the trial for 3 days while she went to Washington, D.C., where she was given her pat on the head, because when you comply, that is when you get a promotion. Now, I am in the middle of explaining many things. I've been explaining these things for a very long time, and I do not think it is registering with 90%. I would say 90% of the people who follow me on any of my platforms, 90% of the people who are really invested in justice for Virginia Giuffre, frankly, for all of us who have been victims and who attempt to survive on a day-to-day basis. From the Franklin case, the one before the John David Norman case, the one before that, before that, before that, before that, the one that is going on today, for all of us, and for those of you who have also suffered, because it's a top-down problem, so it filters down into the general community, as do the, let's call them substance situations, as does the, let's say, situations where somebody who is related is doing something to somebody else who is related. These things are pervasive in our world because of their movies, their music, their books, their media. It's Mockingbird media. It is not called Mockingbird media for no reason. I am pausing here because I just want to make sure that all of you understand that we are not talking about a one-off situation, which is how this is presented again in Mockingbird media. This is a situation that crosses party lines. It crosses country lines. This is a situation that all of you have to become aware of. You have to. Otherwise, there is no hope. I do not believe in justice from contacting anyone in a position of power, and therefore, whenever there is has been from the day I began in July of 2019, there has been on my platform, do not tag anyone. There is a rule. If you're going to follow me, you do not tag anyone connected to either the government on any side of the red or blue, and you do not tag anyone in mainstream. If you do, typically what I used to do before is I would immediately block. I had to block, and I'm not exaggerating, at least 20,000 people during the time that I was posting multiple things, because initially I was just doing threads and sharing information and sharing things on then Twitter, because I thought I lived in a free country. I had not yet learned everything that I now know. I've been researching this for a very long time to find answers, initially to what I thought was just a situation that concerned only me, only to later discover, oh, this is a much broader thing, to then later discover, oh, wait a minute, this is much broader than even I learned, which is what I posted a letter by a friend of Virginia who was also a JE victim. I posted that letter on May 1st on my Substack only. I did not feel safe for that letter to either be on my Patreon, although I will be uploading some information to my Patreon exclusively. Again, whether it's going to be today or tomorrow, I have to see. But it is time we all sort of understand. Well, you know what? You're free to believe or not believe anything you want. What I want to let you know is that there are trolls among us, okay? So trolls like this horrific woman caused Virginia Roberts Giuffre enormous harm. And here she is with the newly appointed director for the three-letter agency, whose letter begins with an F. That woman and all of the trolls that she has amassed during the time that she has been trying to help, not just Andrew, but also Gillen, and now we can add to that this government And frankly, I'll be sure to let you know that it includes this government. Okay? It includes that government. I just can't believe that people, eyes wide shut. Really? Have you not learned anything? There are many people going around commenting on platforms like mine or Sean Atwood's platform, anyone who tries to speak out about the horrors. These are horrors, and you don't know the half of it. You know a little bit of it. You do not know the half of it because I haven't shared the half of it, and neither has Sean Atwood. We have shared a sliver of a very, very, very dark world with you. I have noticed people commenting and pushing back, and I'm going to call them paid trolls because one of the things that I have not shared is that one of the companies owned by my abuser was that kind of company where they would create, they have these large rooms like the three-letter agency that begins with the letter C has. They're just rows and rows and rows of computers and people at desks, and they sit there posting to a platform. And they're also writing articles that are published by mainstream media that are meant to push down real information, make this stuff disappear. In fact, they will contact initially the person who's written an article that's made it, let's say one journalist may not know. In this case, I'm going to use Gary Webb as an example of someone you may be familiar with, may not know that certain things are off topic. And if the platform refuses to remove, and typically those platforms remove the information, well, they then put out 20 times, 200 times as much information with good stuff to push down those people who are doing things with people that are not of age. Not of age. I want to repeat, not of age, which is particularly upsetting. However, I want to again state for the 100th time that when someone is transportationed, and yeah, that's not a word, right? That's not a real word. That whether you are not of age or you are of age, it is the same crime. Because being transportation is illegal technically. Technically, that is illegal. However, who ends up when something like that happens? Who ends up as the victim? As the culprit? It's usually the victim, people. It's never the people who run these things that from the high level. We saw that very clearly in the Franklin situation. And guess what? You're being given a snow job. Do you really think those documents that phase one, which turned out to be a laughingstock, you really think there's going to be a phase two? I'm really worked up because I don't have an army of trolls to combat the misinformation that is going around, and people like this horrific creature who now you see is very friendly with the Donald Trump administration, but frankly she's friendly with whomever administration. And of course, let's not forget the other two people in this photo. Now Virginia, God bless her soul, lost her life because for the most part she could not take any further abuse. And we know that this person, this vile, 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 vile creature, harassed her to death. And with that, I'm going to ask you to kindly like this podcast. If you haven't subscribed, do so. And I hope you have a good day. But more than that, I hope you open your eyes.